With the playoffs coming closer into view, the Philadelphia Eagles head to LA to take on a Rams team that is starting to find its groove. Matthew Stafford and company are always a threat to put up points, while the youth movement has given the Rams defense hope. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. We have the return of the one, the only, Eric Sidewater. And along with him, I am Nick Waters, and we have a lot to discuss about this game against the Rams. And as the Rams start to get healthier on offense, they're fighting for their playoff lives. I don't think that this is a game that the Eagles can overlook as they start to set their eyes towards the number one seed overall. But before we get to that, we didn't have a Commanders review podcast, so we want to talk about the Commanders game just a little bit, but I'll kick it over to you, Eric. What did you think about the Eagles matchup against the Commanders last Thursday night?
I talked about that game as a great litmus test because admittedly the Eagles' schedule before that game, it was pretty weak. And you can't control who you play, and the Eagles took care of business, and that's great. But I really wanted to see how they fare against the Commanders' offense, and they just played awesome. You never know how much of a factor it was that it was a Thursday game, and if that hampered the Commanders' offense. But in the beginning of the game, when the Eagles were going three and out repeatedly, and the game could have got away from them a little bit, they just stopped the Commanders time and time again, kept the team in the game, and then once the offense started rolling in the fourth, they pulled away. But I don't want to gloss over the fact that they had 6 points going into the fourth quarter against a defense that I thought was mediocre at best. The passing offense really needs to tighten things up. We know that they're a dominant rushing game, but that's something I'm going to be keeping my eye on going forward. How about for you?
Yeah, I thought, first of all, it was great to come out and get a win like that over the Commanders and a team that is fighting for the playoffs, right? But with Thursday night games, we saw a lot of what we usually see on Thursday night games and sloppy play on both sides of the ball. I know the Eagles came out and they put up a ton of yards and they held the Commanders to one of their worst days, but there was just sloppy play on both sides of the ball, especially on the offensive line and the tight ends. They just were blowing a lot of assignments when they were blocking in the run game. And then in coverage, there was a number of blown assignments as well. But I think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that they had very little time to prepare for this game in terms of actual practice reps. So these things are kind of to be expected. Come out in the second half, they started putting some things together on both sides of the ball. And let me preface this. Even with the defense having blown assignments and the offense struggling, they stepped up when they needed to. When the defense was giving up big plays, they've eventually found their footing and held the Commanders out of the end zone for much of the game, right? So they overcame some sloppy play early, and they rallied and put everything together and really put the Commanders away. So that's the mark of a good team. And good teams tend to impose their will on these Thursday night games when really what happens on Thursday night games is you're going back to really what your base plays are. You don't have a whole lot of time to throw in a bunch of wrinkles when you're not getting reps to practice that during the week. So overall, I thought it was a good win for the Eagles, just knowing, yes, they were sloppy in the first half, and a very good point that they only had 6 points going into the fourth quarter. They eventually overcame and adjusted, and that's what you want to see from good teams. Can they overcome adversity? Can they adjust and pull out games when they aren't the prettiest to begin with? So I did like seeing that. I do hope to see, I really want to see this game again when both teams have more preparation. I think we're going to see a little bit better of a performance on the Commanders' end. I also think we'll see some cleaned up play on the Eagles' end as well. I'm excited for that game coming up towards the end of the season. Jalen Carter had a dominant game, especially in the run game. I want to mention Quinyon Mitchell. He had a good game, of course. I do want to say, I feel like the Quinyon Mitchell love and hype is getting a little bit overboard when we're having guys like Ron Jaworski is comparing him to Deion Sanders, and people are saying he's prime Darrelle Revis. That's it's not to take away from Quinyon. And if you guys have been paying attention to the podcast, especially during draft time, we mentioned we wanted Quinyon. He was the only guy defensively we would trade up for. We said no on Terrion Arnold and every other single defensive player on the board, but we would trade up for Quinyon. So I think that's showing we have a lot of trust and belief in this guy, right? But this is also a team effort that is leading to the Eagles shutting down opponents. It's not just Quinyon Mitchell one-on-one covering him and all the attention for the rest of the defense is to the other side of the field. That's what Deion Sanders was doing. That's what Darrelle Revis was doing. Are there times when Quinyon is guarding guys one-on-one on his own? Yes, every defense at some point in time, every corner is going to have to cover good players one-on-one at some point in time. This is the NFL, right? But they're doing a really good job playing as a unit, playing with leverage, playing with and helping using your help defenders to bracket and cover these guys. So Quinyon is a huge boost to this team, and you can see why this defense is so much better than they were last year. But guys, if people are coming out here and saying rookie Quinyon Mitchell is comparable to Deion Sanders, they're really just playing off of emotion and getting viewership just because of that. So I just want to temper expectations a little bit. Let's let this guy be a rookie. He's going to have some rookie moments come up, especially when he sees some of these teams that he's played already and he plays them again. They're going to have ways that they're going to come back and try and attack him. One last thing. Malik Neighbors said that he was open multiple times when he played the Eagles. He was open multiple times against Quinyon Mitchell. These guys will come back and he'll get tacked a little bit. So we don't want to set these expectations so high because it's just going to let you down. He's going to get beat at some point in time. Teams are going to figure out ways to attack him. And when you have a defense like the Eagles where they don't switch their corners, well, it's a lot easier to attack the weaker corner or the weaker part of the defense when you're not constantly traveling these guys. So teams can just ignore Quinyon and go other ways. So that's why you're seeing some of these great numbers. But did you have anything else to add before we jump into looking at this Rams offense?
Cooper DeJean, I'm just astonished about how fast he's got up to speed, and it's been a huge difference maker on this defense. So I think, I watched sometimes pre-snap, just watching all the defensive backs communicate, and they're very clean and getting their communications across. There was one play I remember against the Commanders where they come out in trips, and then they motion the outside guy inside, and then they motion across, and he gets 3 quick checks in with the safety, very clean, and then picked it up beautifully. So that's just been a big help, all those guys communicating. They talk about how they're all the same age, they hang out together, and that helps them communicate on the field. So if you want to give credit to Sirianni for one thing, he's a huge believer in fostering that kind of friendly vibe and hanging out with each other and connecting with your teammates, and I'll say it's working.
Yeah, you're hit the nail on the head with DeJean, and especially his communication, and that was a big issue for this defense in the first half of the season, as guys were just not on the same page. He steps in, and he's not the only one, but everything else came together as well, and he was a huge part of that. He reminds me of a little bit like the reason why Reed Blankenship has been able to be as good of a player as he is he has these intangible things that you can't really test for, right? It's something you have to sit there and watch the film and really understand the defense. And the people that are really going to understand it the most are the coaches that are calling the plays and knowing what responsibilities these players have. But it's the little things, the communication aspects that Reed's really good with, that DeJean's really good with. And it's just, DeJean's just a significantly better athlete than Reed. So when you see that all put together, and his physicality, his willingness to come and play in the run game, to take on blockers, that's when you start to see these guys really start to excel. Now, looking at this Rams team, we're going to start with the Rams offense. This offense is led by head coach Sean McVay and offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur. It's headlined by names like Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Kyren Williams. They are currently 21st in points per game, 17th in yards per game, 17th in yards per play, and 17th in EPA per play. I did have to double check that they were 17th in almost all those stats. But having said that, Eric, what did you see from this Rams offense when you were watching them on film?
A ton of condensed splits. I think they lead the league in motion at the snap, and they're second overall in motion. A lot of wide zone runs, which is what directly plays into those play action passes. And a ton of pass plays that target the second level, specifically between the linebackers and safeties. Matt Stafford, if he's not the best, he's one of the best at throwing in that intermediate to deep area, even in tight windows against the sidelines, pinpoint accuracy, corner routes, crossers. That's going to be a huge focus of the Eagles defense this week. And then now that they have Puka and Cooper Kupp back, they're running more screens, just getting the ball into those guys' hands quickly. So, McVay, kind of his MO, in my opinion, is make everything look the same, cause some confusion with the motion at the snap, stress the eye discipline of the defense, and then, match up with the playmakers. But they're not coming out in a ton of personnel packages, spreading the field really wide, which if you have a coordinator like Fangio and he knows exactly what you're going to come out with, like formation wise, I think that potentially could be an advantage for the Eagles. So how about for you?
Yeah, so a lot of the same things that you mentioned. They're second in motion rate in the NFL. I've mentioned this in previous podcasts that the Rams offense, they motion before they motion. And then next gen stats just came out and showed that they are actually first in multiple motions per snap. So they're motioning a ton. They use motions to see what the defense is doing, and then they shift over. And then from there, they decide what play that they want to attack the defense in, right? So it's really an indicator for the offense. Now, I want to mention something about this offense. They have dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the year. And to their offensive line and to their wide receiver core. So that's kind of hard to deal with, especially the offensive line I don't know if they've played with the same offensive line unit in a single game or in more than one game this season. So that is hard to overcome. The offensive line is a unit that is greater than the sum of its parts. You really have to be playing on the same page. And if you're not, a good talent on an offensive line will falter if you are not playing together. So that makes things difficult. Now, to touch on that, this offense has scored more than 20 points in one of its first 6 games. They've scored more than 20 points in 3 of their last 4 since week 8, since they got Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back on this offense. Now, I'm going to mention since week 8 a lot in our breakdowns because it's kind of hard to look at this offense from weeks 3 to 8 when they didn't have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. It's a completely different offense. So just prefacing that, I'm going to be mentioning that a number of times this week. Now, Puka was ejected in the first half of week 9 game. So a number of stats that I have looked at have excluded that game and have focused primarily on weeks 8, 10, and 11. So keep that in mind. But like you said, a lot of motion, a lot of condensed sets. They like to attack with a lot of crossers and end breaking routes. I will add this. They want to run the ball. They really do want to be a team that runs the ball, even though they do have one of the highest pass rates in the NFL. The issue is they're not very good at running the ball. Part of that goes back to their offensive line being banged up and constantly rotating pieces in and out, but they're not very good at running the ball. You'll still see times when Kyren Williams has averaged like 3.5 yards a carry and he has 22 carries in the game. They will commit to the run so that they can open up stuff in the pass game, even if the run isn't working. Now, I don't think they're going to have much success on the run against the Eagles. They're currently 4th highest in run rate and on runs between the tackle, but they're 26th in yards per carry on those runs. The Eagles defense, for what it's worth, is 8th in yards per carry allowed on runs between the tackles. If you look at their number since the bye week, they would be 5th overall on the season. So I don't think this is a game where the Rams are going to be able to run very well, but they're still probably going to commit to the run. Now, this run game is all about physicality. They do motion, but their motioning is really to get more leverage, better leverage for their blockers. They really want to run downhill at you and win with strength. And their wide receivers will block like H-backs, so the safeties and nickel corners have to come physical and prepared to defeat blocks and be prepared and understand the leverage that they need to fit into the run game with. And they will force outside corners to tackle. They will find ways to make sure that your corner is the unblocked defender and they're going to make him tackle. So this is going to be a game that I do expect they are going to try and run, but when you aren't having a ton of success on the ground, it does lead to a little bit higher of a pass rate. So I expect a bit of a higher pass rate in this game. The Rams are currently 7th highest in pass rate and the Eagles are 10th highest in pass rate against. So I see this as a game where Stafford does drop back to pass a little bit higher at a higher rate than he currently does this season. And then you add in, you got Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back. We're probably going to see a bit higher of a pass rate as well. But jumping into some of these player matchups, let's talk about Matthew Stafford. Right now, at this point in his career, he really is a pocket passer that will dice you up if not pressured. He's 7th in passing yards out of 40 qualifying quarterbacks. He has the 9th fastest time to throw. He's 14th in average depth of throw. So he's not just taking and throwing underneath routes quickly. He is pushing the ball down the field a little bit more than you'd think for a guy that has the 9th fastest time to throw. He is currently 30th in adjusted completion percentage, and that's only a marginal improvement since week 8. He has his lowest big-time throw percentage of his career, while he's tied for 15th highest and turnover-worthy throw percentage. He will throw into tight windows, especially if he is pressured. He does have 7 interceptions this year, and he has been one of the worst quarterbacks when under pressure. He's 33rd in passer rating, 36th in adjusted completion percentage, and has the 4th highest turnover-worthy throw percentage when pressured. He's become a pure pocket passer. He has 0 scrambles on the year. I will say this, though. I think that's a choice by him. There's been a number of times on film where he has gotten himself out of some pretty sticky pressure, so I wouldn't classify him as a statue in the pocket. If you know Matthew Stafford, he's dealt with a ton of injuries throughout his year that he's played through. And knowing who he is, he knows that he can get to his next reads. He is a cerebral quarterback. So I think part of him not scrambling is he is just trying, when he does have to extend, he's extending to look for guys down the field. So while he hasn't scrambled yet this year, I don't think this is necessarily a game where you can go in there and be like, oh, I'm going to start taking a bunch of inside counters and leave an edge for Stafford, because he will extend and then hit something down the field. But we'll have to see if he does end up scrambling at some point in this career, some point in this year. But Eric, what do you think about Stafford on film?
My notes were almost identical to what you just said. But I will say, I do think he is a little bit of a statue there, especially when there's interior pressure. He'll kind of often just quickly backpedal and then just kind of chuck it in the dirt, or throw it low so it's not intercepted. So I'm hoping the Eagles will dial up some kind of sim pressures that get interior pressure, hopefully with like Bond or Dean screaming up the A gap, because I think that just might kill the play right then and there. One thing you talked about, how he'll make tight window throws. I could imagine the Eagles, like sometimes if you're in really good position the whole play, you'll kind of just relax a little bit because you're like, okay, they're not going to come this way. Stafford still will, so you got to stay vigilant. And when he makes that throw, play physical through the catch point, because it could be, perfectly placed even if you're in the guy's hip pocket. So just stay vigilant, play, until the whistle's blown. So that's kind of what I had on Stafford.
Yeah, absolutely. And he'll throw some hospital balls too. So there'll be some opportunities for some big hits. You got to be vigilant over the middle. Like there'll be tip passes. There'll be opportunities for, who's great at finding those tip passes? CJ. So I do expect us to get 1 interception in this game. Stafford will give you the opportunity. But let's look at some of Stafford's weapons. And right now, Puka Nacua is his go-to weapon. He has his highest target rate per route run on the team since week 8, minus that week 9 game where he had the ejection. He is a tough and physical receiver. He has good hands, and he excels against zone. He knows how to adjust his route, tempo his routes to find the soft spots and the zone coverage. I will say this, though. He's not a burner, and he isn't a guy that's going to go out there and route you up one-on-one. And for that reason, I do think he is a good fit for the system with what the Rams do with their condensed sets, with their use of motion. How McVay designs his offense gets his guys a lot of easy opportunities for the receivers. Now, part of the issue is you have guys like Stafford, who is willing to throw over the middle almost to a fault and sometimes gets his guys killed. But I don't know if Puka Nacua would come to the Eagles team and just be the same dominant receiver playing in this system, where you have to go out there and win one-on-one a little bit more. I think he is a benefit of playing in a system that's willing to use his willingness and ability to go over the middle to win on crossing routes. If you can take away some of those crossing routes and force him to be a guy that's trying to beat press coverage on the outside, he's not a guy that's going to go out there and burn you unless you're James Bradbury in 2023. So, and I'll add one more to this. He aligns outside, and I'll put outside in quotations. He aligns outside on greater than 70% of the snaps. I say outside in quotations because they use so many condensed sets and so many stack alignments that, yeah, technically he is aligned outside, but it's not in the traditional sense that you see like A.J. Brown lined up outside the numbers on 70% of his routes. So just something to think about with Puka Nacua. Did you have anything to add about him before we touch on Kupp?
Yeah, you made some great points, because I'm watching Nacua and I'm blown away, because he does everything out there. He'll catch the screen and run for 20 yards. He'll catch it over the middle, take the big hit, and hold on. He'll run end arounds, and he'll make huge crackback blocks. But the thing you mentioned about him kind of being perfect for that system, I think that's spot on. if you're going to line him up as a traditional X and tell him to win one-on-one on the outside, I think it would greatly mitigate his effectiveness. But the way he is employed in the Rams offense, it's a match made in heaven. And because he is in that offense, I view him, in my opinion, top 10 receiver. I genuinely look at him like that, just his impact. So yeah, I never would have expected that. And I thought, after his rookie season, maybe that was a little bit of, luck involved because no one realized what he was, but now he's come back and he looks just as good. So yeah, he's a terrific player.
And I think that's something to note when you go into draft season, because if you look at this guy and try and pencil him into this mold of being, okay, your typical X receiver, well, yeah, he's probably not going to stack up to other guys when you're comparing him to the Jamar Chases of the world, right? But if you can figure out and realize that he has a really good skill set, and like you said, I agree. I think he is a top 10 receiver in the NFL when used in the right system. If you can take advantage and amplify those strengths while mitigating the weaknesses, then you allow these guys to really thrive and shine. And that comes back to your scouting department, working in lockstep with your coaching staff, finding guys that really fit into your system. So the Rams did a really good job there finding Puka Nacua. Now, Cooper Kupp is no slouch either. I mean, people know who Cooper Kupp is, former Triple Crown winner, most yards, receptions, and touchdowns by a receiver in one season. He aligns primarily in the slot. And again, in the slot, when we think about this Rams offense, sometimes the slot receiver and the outside receiver are pretty much the same thing, but he does align more so in the slot than Cooper Kupp does. And he does a lot more underneath work, especially since Puka Nacua has come along. Cooper Kupp's average depth of target and where he's operating at has dropped. And maybe that's part of him aging and dealing with a lot of injuries throughout his career. Maybe that's a factor as well, but he's getting targeted a lot more on underneath routes at this point in his career. He is still an excellent route runner against man and against zone. He's very good at the top of his routes using stems to gain leverage, using head fakes, and using his body to create separation at the top of the route. He's tough and physical as well. And I should mention this about Puka and Cooper Kupp. Their physicality and their toughness really lends itself to how the Rams like to attack on offense, with using the receivers to fit in as blockers, essentially like fullbacks in the run game, right? So you need guys that are well built like Cooper and Puka are, and are also tough, physical, and willing in the run game. Now, I will say this: the injuries and age are showing to a degree. His yards after catch over expectation per reception is by far the lowest of his career. It's the only season of his career where that number is below 1 yard. So there are some signs that he is starting to slow down, but still, at the end of the day, he's a guy that you have to account for, and he will beat you if you let him beat you. But Eric, what did you think about Cooper Kupp?
Coming out of college, I was a huge fan of his, and I am shocked when he dropped, I think, to the 4th round. And then he, like you said, went on to win the Triple Crown. To me, he's a shell of himself. And just juxtaposing him with Puka, I don't view him as a game breaker. Specifically, like you noted, that the yak threat is greatly diminished. So he's the kind of guy who, yeah, he'll route you up and catch it on the sidelines, but it's like for 6 yards. It's not going to go for much more. Not to say you can let your guard down, but he's not going to really beat you over the top. Now, maybe I just jinx the Eagles and he'll go for a huge touchdown, but that's not the guy I'm worried about between the two, for sure.
Yeah, he did have a big touchdown against the Patriots. I think they were playing cover 0, and it was a safety that he beat, so there wasn't safety help over top against man coverage. But the Eagles haven't been giving up big plays in the past game, and I don't think that's going to continue in this game. You got to get lucky and hope they blow a coverage, and I don't think that's going to happen too often in this game. I will touch on Demarcus Robinson. He's not a go-to receiver for them, but he has come up clutch a number of times for this team. He is a veteran player. Again, he'll mix it up in the run game as well, but he's getting targeted further down the field. He is taking over some of those Cooper Kupp routes that he used to run, where he's taking some of these deeper end breaking routes. He'll go routes down the sideline as well. Is he a guy that I expect is going to come out here and beat the Eagles corners one-on-one? No, but I do expect that he'll probably end up with like a 20-yard catch at some point in the game. So I would expect to hear Demarcus Robinson's name at some point. Now, jumping to their running backs, I'm going to touch mainly on Kyren Williams. he is their workhorse back. They give him a ton of work, and he's an undersized back. So I wonder how long his body can hold up to it. But listen, this guy's got good vision, footwork, and toughness. Really, that toughness aspect comes to play, especially with how they like to run. A lot of inside zone, a lot of duo. So, like for a guy his size, you have to be a tough runner. He does make guys miss, but he's not super explosive. So I don't think he's going to come out here and go and beat you for a 40-yard touchdown down the sideline, So I don't expect that out of Kyren Williams, but he is a guy that will make guys miss in the hole. He will eke out some solid gains. But again, this Eagles defense is good at is taking away inside runs and this Rams team just isn't that good at that right now. So I don't expect Kyren Williams is going to have a huge game. If anything, I expect to see him used a little bit more in the pass game. But did you want to add anything about these Rams running backs?
Yeah, Kyren Williams is really impressive. Like you mentioned, one way I kind of distinguish between him and Saquon is a home run threat on every play, and Williams isn't. But outside of that, between the quickness, balance, agility, there's a lot of similarities. He doesn't quite have the power that Saquon has, and he is a dynamic receiving threat. I saw him on an unbelievable Texas route score a touchdown. Little guy, like you mentioned. So yeah, he's someone that I could imagine if they play that heavy technique where Josh Sweat scoops inside and the Rams love to run wide zone, that he might gash him a couple times. But I don't think it's going to be something where the whole game they're successfully running.
Yeah, same here. So let's move on to our weekly question of who is blocking Jalen Carter. And this week, it looks like it is going to be Kevin Dotson, although he did miss Thursday's practice with an illness. I assume that'll be taken care of by the game time. But this should be a plus matchup for Jalen Carter. He has a pressure rate that is currently 40th out of the 79 qualifying offensive guards in the NFL, and his sack rate is 49 out of those 79 qualifying offense guards as well. He is strong and powerful, but I'll say this about Dotson. He is slow to redirect and mirror. If you can get him in space, Jalen Carter has the athleticism to, number one, threaten him outside, and then use that to set up inside counters. You get this guy moving laterally or having to mirror stunts and line movement, he struggles with that. I think this is a game where Jalen Carter can be quite disruptive. And I know last week, Jalen Carter was getting a ton of praise for being disruptive against the Commanders. He was much more disruptive in the run game than he was in the pass game. He did have a very quick win against Sam Cosmi, but I thought Sam Cosmi had a pretty good game against Jalen Carter and pass pro. I don't think that's going to be the case this week. I think Jalen Carter can take advantage of Kevin Dotson. And I will say this as well. The Eagles should try and find ways to get Kevin Dotson in space, widen out the fronts, or use fronts that force him to cover ground and then run some stunts back inside at the guy, because he has some trouble changing directions. But they brought him in because he's a strong and powerful guy. The Rams have really changed to wanting to be a downhill running team, and so that's why he was brought in. But as long as Jalen Carter isn't sitting there and trying to win with a ton of bull rushes, I think he should have some success. And when we look at the rest of the offensive line, an important question, an important thing to look out for is who's going to be playing right tackle. If it is backup Warren McClendon, then that's going to be a big win for the Eagles. He's 68 out of 79 qualifying offensive tackles and pressure rate, and 72nd out of 79 in sack rate allowed. When you look at who their starter is, Rob Havenstein, I don't think he's anything super special, but he is definitely an upgrade over McClendon. So that is something to watch out for with injury reports. Havenstein has been out a couple weeks, but he was limited on practice on Thursday. He did miss on Wednesday, so that's something that we're going to need to pay attention to. Even if he does play, I do imagine he's probably going to be a little bit slowed down, so I don't think he is going to be at his top trying to protect Matt Stafford, so I would also try and threaten him as well, and with different packages and different stunts. Now, looking at their center, Bo Lemmer, he's a 6th-round rookie that took over the starting job. It was supposed to be Jonah Jackson, who was signed from the Detroit Lions to a big deal. He played guard for the Lions. The Rams are trying to make him a center. It has not worked out very well. He's actually gotten benched for Lemmer at this point in time. But Lemmer can beat as well. And listen, I wouldn't make him communicate on stunts and pressures. He has struggled with that. So give him different exotic looks, especially on obvious passing downs. Throw a lot of stunts and line movements in his face, and make him communicate and pass off assignments with the rest of the offensive line. Did you have anything to add to the front before we jump into looking at some of the defensive game plan?
Yeah, I think it's part of the reason Stafford's time to throw, I think it might be third fastest in the NFL. They clearly don't have a lot of faith in that offensive line. And a lot of their success, it literally comes down to if he gets time in the pocket, he's picking them defense apart. And if he doesn't, he gets happy feet and throws it away or even interceptions. So I imagine Fangio is going to be really thinking about how he can scheme up pressure or if we can just win one-on-one.
So jumping into the defensive game plan, what would you do defensively, or what do you expect defensively from this defense to slow down this Rams attack?
I would treat Nacua like he's Jamar Chase, to be honest with you. There were even some coverages where, like, we had three guys with eyes on Chase. So I would be bracketing him. I would, one thing I would talk about in the run game is I'd rather the edge rusher set the edge on these wide zones. Sometimes the Eagles are exchanging responsibilities and having like a safety roll down. And I don't think the Rams get enough vertical push where you need to do that. And then if they are behind the sticks, I think then you get some pressure on Stafford and you can get some stops that way. I would use a lot of sim pressures. You mentioned how they have kind of a shaky offensive line that with a lot of moving parts, so it's hard to communicate when you're bringing a bunch of guys up on the line and you don't know who's coming. And taking away the short middle. One of the reasons Stafford's time to throw is so short is because how many times a game one of their receivers, usually Kupp or Nacua, just run 4 or 5 yards, turn around, and it's out in a millisecond. Just don't give them that many easy completions on early downs for 6 yards. I would make them earn those plays. That's kind of how I'd attack their offense. How about for you?
Yeah, so, ideally I would like to send targeted coverages at Puka, but it's just so hard to do with how much they motion. At that point in time, if it just takes a lot of communication to dedicate coverage to a guy when you're moving them around and you're motioning. And if it's not him motioning, he might motion before someone else motions. So it's like so much communication that must go on that at that point in time. So it does make it a little bit harder to target guys and with targeted coverages, but I'm sure there will be ways that they do try and take him away and with certain looks. Now, I will say coverage wise, what I would make sure I try and do, because the Rams team are a team much like this Sean McVay and the Shanahan tree, they like to throw to spots on the field. And what I mean by that is with those end breaking routes, they're really trying to suck your linebackers up and your second level defenders up so that they can hit spots behind you. So what I would do coverage wise is I'd emphasize coverages that are going to take a safety and essentially use him and place him in situations where he can act like a robber over the middle of the field. That doesn't always mean playing man coverage and using him as the extra defender that's robbing the middle of the field. You can play a lot of split field safety coverages, morph into this. And as well as that, you can use cover 3 variations where you have the safety as one of the hook defenders. So they're rotating to the middle of the field from the top down, as opposed to a linebacker rotating to the middle of the field from the bottom up, right? So that helps to take away and give you eyes and vision to take away a lot of crossing routes. So I do that coverage-wise. Now, I will say this. I expect the Eagles are going to come out and play in their over front a lot. That is their base front that they use. What has really turned into their base front. They're running a shit ton of nickel since Cooper DeJean has been back. So when they play nickel, they use a lot of their over front. So what that means is the weak B gap is going to be uncovered. I've talked about this in a number of my episodes that I've done, so it's kind of hard to explain everything in a podcast form. But what I would do at that point in time is you really want to manipulate and attack that B gap. So I would use different stunts to kind of take away that B gap, because you can get some tackles for loss against the run game by using different types of stunts to present an open B gap and then close it. And especially with how the Rams like to attack, there are oftentimes their offensive line is going to be flowing towards that weak B gap. I'd also use different blitzes to take advantage of that as well, and really trying to shoot the gap, because what they're going to do is they're going to bring in a receiver to try inside, and he'll block inside of in between the guard and the tackle, or between the tackle and the tight end, and they'll try and dig out the safety that's rotated down, or the nickel corner that's rotated down. If you can send a corner blitz or even a safety blitz and beat them to the spot, you can get tackles for loss that way. So I would try different line movements and different pressures to try and attack and manipulate that open B gap that the Eagles are going to present. Now, we need to touch on some housekeeping notes. Bryce Huff is out with wrist surgery. It's looking like Jalen Hunt should presumably take more snaps, but he was limited in practice on Thursday, and he didn't practice on Wednesday. So that's something to look out for. Having said that, I expect he's probably going to play mainly on early downs. I still would expect a heavy dose of Brandon Graham and Nolan Smith as the main pass rushers, opposite of Josh Sweat on obvious passing downs. But moving to this Rams defense is led by defensive coordinator Chris Shula, and it's headlined by names like standout rookies Jared Verse on the edge and Braden Fiske at defensive tackle. That is paired with their second-year players on the defensive line in Kobie Turner and Byron Young, who both had standout rookie seasons as well. They're currently 22nd in points per game, 23rd in yards per game, 26th in yards per play, and 21st in EPA per play. So despite the fact that they have a pretty solid group among their defensive line, they haven't performed that well statistically on defense. So Eric, what did you see from this defense on film?
They're running a lot of 3 deep coverages, heavy cover 3, and they'll mix in like cover 9. On rundowns, they play quite heavy. They run the third most base personnel, and then on pass downs, they go to dime, and they run the third most dime. So it's kind of like we're bringing in all the troops to stop the run, or we're putting a bunch of defensive backs on the field. They're pretty predictable in that sense. And above all that, I noticed that they're kind of small and slow at all 3 levels. You'll just see they'll give up 20-yard pass plays on the regular. They'll let guys run like crazy yards after catch, poor tackling, bad eye discipline from the middle of their defense, lack of talent in general on their secondary. I think the defense stinks. I'm not impressed by it. Now, they've put together some good pass rush games, and we'll talk about that more, and that's helped a lot, and they have had some good performances defensively that kept them in games, but I think they could be victimized. So how about for you?
Yeah, so I'll touch on their pressure and their defensive line first, because that's really where you have to start with this defense. You have to take care of the pressure that they have been able to generate. If you look at the different grading services, and again, I've said this in different podcasts, every grading service grades pressures differently. So I'll give you 2 different ones. Next Gen Stats has this Rams defense first in pressure rate at 41.7%. Sports Info Solutions has them third in pressure rate at 38.1%. So either way you slice it, they're getting pressure. Now, they have studs across the board and really a very athletic front, I would say, especially when you look at their testing numbers, from Jared Verse and Byron Young on the edges to Kobie Turner and Braden Fiske at defensive tackles. I just want to read out some of their pressure rate and pass rush win rates for you guys. Jared Verse is currently 3rd out of 103 qualifying edge rushers in pressure rate. He is also 8th in pass rush win rate. So he's getting pressure on his own, but he's also winning with skill as well. Byron Young is 16th in pressure rate. Kobie Turner is 13th out of 108 qualifying defensive tackles in pressure rate. Braden Fiske is 6th out of 108 qualifying defensive tackles and pressure rate. Now, let me jump back a second. Byron Young, his pass rush win rate is 43rd. Kobie Turner's is 41st, and Braden Fiske's is 48th. So, what does this tell us, and what can we see on film? A lot of their pressures that they're generating is scheme-based, where they're getting unblocked looks, and really what they're doing a really good job of is winning with stunts. Also playing as a unit and getting cleanup sacks when one guy gets a pressure and then another guy steps up and finishes to get the sack. They play with a lot of effort, a lot of motor, and it is an athletic front, so they do really threaten you up front. But if you can handle their stunts and pick up their stunts and their twist and can get their protections down, then I think you can slow down this pass rush. And especially, I know Jared Verse is third in pressure rate. When we touch on him in specific, we'll talk about why I think this is probably one of his harder matchups that he's faced this year. So the while they do get a lot of pressure, a lot of it is schemed up pressure through stunts and different pressures that are generating what are considered unblocked looks. I will say this, running stunts is a skill. So just because you run a stunt doesn't mean you're going to be good at it. It does take a certain type of skill set to be better at running stunts than other guys, which is why I think they went out and got a bunch of highly athletic guys that really weren't that well refined as pass rushers because they knew that they could scheme up ways to get these guys some pressures. In addition to that, they do cause a lot of confusion and force communication, like I said, on the offensive line, but on the back end as well with some of the coverages that they do. They do a lot of sim pressures, or I shouldn't say a lot of sim pressures. They're about average in blitz rate, sim pressure rate, and stunt rate. But the thing is, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if it's going to be a blitz where you're sending 5 or more guys, and you don't know if it's going to be sim pressure where it looks like a blitz and you're dropping a guy off the edge. And then add to that, they'll run a bunch of different stunts. So they force you to communicate on the offensive line. They force you to have to go through your reads on the back end. And I think that does help to mitigate some of their issues on defense for like what you said. I don't think their back end is very talented and very athletic. So it causes issues when teams are able to figure them out and get completions. And you saw a number of times, like in the Seahawks game, they got to like second and 30, and second and 20 a number of times. And then they essentially gave up first downs because they just threw screens underneath and they couldn't rally and tackle to the ball. So that will be an issue against this Eagles team. Now, I will say this. Their run defense is solid, but I wouldn't say unbeatable. They're 12th in yards per carry on designed runs, but they're 4th best in explosive run rate allowed. Saquon, for his part, is 5th highest in percentage of yards that he has gained on breakaway runs, which are runs of 15 or more yards. So while in coverage, I do think that they can be exploited if you can get guys in space. They've done a pretty good job of taking away explosive runs. So that's something that we will have to watch out for. Now, jumping into some of the player matchups, we got to talk about Jared Verse. He is the guy that we got to start with. He is the best player on defense. He has excellent burst off the line, but he mainly wins with power. Bull rush, bull rush, bull rush. That is his go-to move. If you can't stop his bull rush, he is going to cause pressure and wreak havoc all game long. He does a good job with his bull rush, but he'll change it up and use a stutter bull rush where he comes up, stutters, so that throws the timing off for the offensive tackle when he's preparing to anchor, and then he bull rushes you. He also does a good job with hand fighting to get offensive linemen's hands off of him when he is bull rushing, so that is a part of his game plan as well. He will use an inside counter, but outside of his bull rush and his inside counter, he doesn't have a whole lot of moves that he uses right now, but he does win with a high motor. He gets a lot of pressures late in the rep as well. And the pass rush game plan is really built around Verse. They will flip him and find the best matchup for him. We saw in the 49ers game, if you look at how often he rushes, he primarily rushes over left tackles. But against the 49ers, that flipped. His percentages flipped, so he didn't have to go against Trent Williams. They'll also move him around and rush him over guards and centers. So they're treating him kind of like they're Micah Parsons, where they're going to find out where the best matchup is and place him there. So I do think he's likely going to be matched up with Jordan Mailata. And as we know, Jordan Mailata, with his size, he handles power pretty well. I don't think this is a matchup that bodes well for Jared Verse. It's a matchup where he's probably going to have to use some of his other pitches if he wants to get pressure, namely his inside counter. But you're playing with fire if you're going to run a bunch of inside counters with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. And in addition to that, if Mailata understands and is prepared for that inside counter, I think he should be okay and have a good game against Jared Verse. But what did you see from Jared Verse?
Almost every one of his sacks, the entire defensive line is like converging on the quarterback, collapsing the pocket. He had a million opportunities for more sacks when it was him kind of one-on-one in the quarterback in the open field or chasing him for pursuit, and he never got the guy. He always comes up with air. And I could envision that happening. He simply cannot track down Hurts as long as he sees him coming. So I'm not worried about Verse. I will say one thing you didn't mention. I think for his power and size, his get off is amazing at times. He times the snap and it comes off like a rocket. And that first punch comes with some power. He's exceeded my expectations, candidly. But I would just mention that their defensive line as a whole, they seem to do a good job kind of rushing as a unit, which is something that we've talked about with the Eagles as well. So
Yeah, like we talked about with the offensive line, this is a unit where the sum is greater than the parts. They're rushing together, and so when a quarterback steps up out of one guy's way, he's getting hit with another guy that's coming at him. Now, when we look at some of their other guys on the defensive line, I'm going to kind of group these guys together a little bit. They're pretty similar in their playing style. Kobie Turner and Braden Fiske. I'll start with Kobie Turner. He's relentless, a high motor player. He plays with excellent leverage. He is stout and very strong. He does a really good job as a penetrator on stunts, and oftentimes he is able to rip through. And as they're passing off the stunt, he comes through and they kind of forget about him and he's able to get some pressures that way. Braden Fiske is very similar in that regard to Kobie Turner, and that he is a high motor player, a relentless player. He wins with a lot on stunts a lot and with effort a lot. Now he has elite level athleticism for the position. Anyone that was with us through the scouting process and saw the combine saw Braden Fiske's performance that he put up. So he is a good athlete, and I do worry a little bit about Becton against the combination of Turner and Fiske. They'll rotate them around. They don't play on dedicated sides. So I do worry to a degree if Becton isn't patient with his strikes, if he gets off balance and has bad posture and bad strike timing, he does struggle with redirecting and struggle with guys that can bend and rip under you. And Fiske and Turner can do that. So, and they're quick enough that Becton's not great with recovering. So if he is beat early, then he can, I feel like that's a matchup that the Rams can exploit. But that's something I'm sure Stout is preparing him for, and understanding that strike timing is going to be huge for Mekhi Becton in this game. Don't get caught reaching, and I think he will be okay. But they do run a lot of stunts, and if there is the biggest criticism to Becton's game is his ability to redirect. That is going to be put on full display, and he's going to be tested with that in this game. So that's something to pay attention to. Did you have anything else to add about anyone else on this defensive line?
yeah, I think you mentioned how athletic their a line is, and a lot. It's really, to me, it's a lot on that interior, and so does it really translate to getting hurts? And I think if they can keep him in the pocket, yes, they probably will get some chances. But I really doubt if he starts scrambling that they'll be able to wrangle him in the open field. But this is, like you mentioned, this is the strength of their defense. And so if I would imagine that a lot of our game plan will be put on how can we neutralize that pass rush, and that's going to go a long way.
Now, looking at some of their other players on defense, I want to look at Cam Kinchens, their rookie safety. He was one of those guys that the classic safety who looks really good on film, and then he comes into the scouting process. He tests very bad, and then his stock drops. And next thing you know, he's a starting safety for an NFL team. As a rookie, he currently has 3 interceptions. He does have 1 forced fumble and 1 fumble recovery, but his athleticism can get put on display at times, especially with the way that the Rams play defense. The way the Rams play defense isn't all that different from the way Fangio likes to use his defense, where it's a lot of split safety looks. It's a lot of disguise. They use a lot of sim pressures. It's a lot of trying to confuse you on offense, right? And what goes into that is sometimes you end up with a safety on a receiver because you don't flip and rotate your corners with receivers when you're playing man coverage, right? And we've seen that with the Eagles having TJ Gardner-Johnson on receivers. We've seen Reed Blankenship get matched up with receivers. You'll see, and if the Eagles are smart about it, they will exploit Cam Kinchens in man coverage when they get to situations like 3rd and short. So I would expect to see Kinchens tested because he isn't a great athlete, but he is one of those players that has good instincts for the position. And if you put it in his direction, in his vicinity, and you're sloppy with the ball, he will go and find the ball. So did you have anything to mention about Kinchens or any of the other players on the back 7 of this defense?
Yeah, I've touched on it kind of at the top of the show, how I thought they're kind of small and slow, and you'll just see repeated plays where guys are just running wild and almost no one wants to tackle, or just letting receivers run free. Kinchins has hit the stat sheet and he is a playmaker, but overall on a down-to-down basis, I don't think he's a good player at this stage. Cam Curl, who is a guy I thought was great value for what he signed for, I think it was like 4 million. He looks bad, very slow. Um, I watched quite a bit of Rams film over the last 2 seasons, and it's almost become a meme at this point. Number 37, Quinton Lake. This guy's one of the worst players I've ever watched in all facets. I can't believe that he stays on the field. And then Roseboom, he's kind of a funny middle linebacker that you will not be able to take your eye off him with his hair flying all over the place and he's pointing like a banshee. But on these underneath crossers, he can get exploited. He simply can't catch up to the guys he's trying to cover. So I hope the Eagles like lean on mesh if they think it's like a man coverage situation. That's a guy who could be exploited. So that's kind of some of the guys that I think we should target.
Yeah, and they will also blitz Roseboom up the middle a lot, similar to the way that you see Kobie Dean blitzed up the middle as well. I do think because of what the Rams do defensively, they do a good job of forcing running backs to stay in for protection. So I would expect to see a little bit lower of a route run rate from Saquon Barkley and these running backs this game. But we'll have to see what the Rams come out and do to try and attack this Eagles offense. But offensively, what would you do, Eric? What do you think we'll see from this Eagles offense as they try and attack this Rams defense?
I think the talent disparity between the Eagles offense and the Rams defense is humongous. And so therefore I'd go for a straightforward attack. You can test this team downfield regularly. I see teams almost shooting themselves in the foot, trying to just advance slowly. And then they get behind the sticks, the Rams dial up a nice stunt, and they get off the field. But had they just gone down, like thrown it bombs away, it's almost a completion every time. I think they'll have a heck of a time trying to tackle Saquon in the open field for the reasons I mentioned before, being slow and small and at times showing not a high willingness to tackle from their secondary players. So yeah, nothing fancy. Definitely no double reverse, flea flickers, or anything like that. Yeah, and I want them to target AJ down the field. Like, I don't care who's on him, Witherspoon, Williams, Lake, or whoever else. Just I want them to test these guys downfield. The passing offense needs to start to build momentum as we get into this home stretch, and this is a great time to start.
Yeah.
How about for you?
Absolutely. And they will play a lot of off coverage, and then they'll sit on curl routes, on comebacks and stuff like that. So I think we're probably going to see a situation where we see the Eagles try and run a stutter and go with AJ Brown. I mean, we see it almost weekly, so I don't know why we wouldn't see it in this game, but I do expect to see that in this game. Now, I will say this, you can use formations and motions to get a linebacker out of the box. I think we'll see probably a similar game plan in the run game to what we saw when we played the Falcons. The defenses are very similar, so I expect to see a lot of similar run concepts that they can exploit. If they don't move that linebacker out of the box, especially when they're in their trips formations, then you're getting one-on-one on the outside, because what they're doing is they're dropping a safety either over a receiver or well, that's essentially what they'd be doing. They'd be dropping a safety over one of the receivers, and then that's locking the box so one of the linebackers doesn't have to leave, right? So make them make the decision. Are you going to give us one-on-ones on the outside, or are you going to remove a linebacker out of the run fit? And knowing that they play with a lot of split field safety coverages, then you got a safety trying to come down and stop the run from depth. So I expect that they're going to use formations and motions to remove a linebacker out of the box in the run game. Now, there are times when they're going to walk up their linebackers to the line of scrimmage. I wouldn't be afraid to run at those looks. When you can get hands on a linebacker right away, it makes it a lot easier for the linemen, as opposed to having to try and chase the guy down in space where they're at a disadvantage. So, and we saw this, a great play, a great example of this was last year when the Bucs tried to, it was like 3rd and 6. The Buccaneers walked all their guys, their linebackers, up to the line of scrimmage. I think it was Cam Jurgens was able to get his hands on Devin White right away, and it went for like a 25-yard gain. So I think there's going to be times where we see the Eagles get to 3rd and 5 and they're going to run the ball. And I think they're running the ball because they're going to try and take advantage of the front and everyone walked up. And again, it's probably going to be in situations where they're around midfield and they're willing to go for it on fourth down. So just be prepared for that. Again, be prepared for the stunts. That's not so much game plan wise. That's more of practice wise, your preparation, making sure you are good passing off your stunts. Stellan has been good at getting his guys prepared. I expect that to be the case this week. Now, I will say, kind of contradicting what you said about, trying to take shots downfield. Definitely take your shots. There will be opportunities to take your shots, but because of the fact that they do a lot of things to confuse the quarterback, I think you do have to be patient and don't force things. If you see a picture pre-snap that you think you're going to get and it changes post-snap, don't be afraid to move and get to the check down. Like you said, they struggle to tackle in space. So get the ball to Saquon on the check down. We saw what happened. You get Saquon the ball in the check down against the Commanders. He takes it for a 40-yard reception, right? So use Saquon, use that as an extension of the run game. I don't know if Jalen's going to do that. That's not really been his MO as a passer, but when the opportunities are there, when you do get some confusion and you're unsure, know where your checkdowns are, get the ball to those guys. There will be opportunities to push the ball down the field, though, especially with some quarters, some of their split safety coverage beaters or quarter beaters. There will be opportunities to take the shots. I do expect Jalen to scramble around a fair amount just due to the expected pressure rate and the amount of exotic fronts and constant disguise on the back end and how much they drop their defensive linemen or guys they've walked up to the line of scrimmage, how often they drop him into coverage. Those are times where you start to see Jalen drop his eyes and start to scramble around a little bit. So I am interested in a Jalen Hurts over on his rushing yards this week, but we'll have to see what the number is. One more house cleaning thing to talk about. Devontae Smith is potentially going to be out. He has been, as of this recording, a non-participant in Wednesday and Thursday's practice. He was a limited participant. He was listed as limited participant in Tuesday's and Wednesday's practice last week. And due to the short week, those are more reflective of your Thursday and Friday practices. So they had him listed as a limited participant last week before ultimately him being a full go. If he has a hamstring injury and hasn't practiced in any capacity on Wednesday and Thursday, that's not a good sign that he is going to be playing on Friday. And this might be a situation where, listen, this is a team that is going to be in the playoffs. We want to make sure that these guys are going to be at full strength for the stretch run. And again, this should be a game where we're able to take care of the Rams. I do expect Jahan Dotson and Grant Calcaterra will probably pick up some of the slack and a little bit of Kobie, but I really think you're going to see much more emphasis on Dallas Goedert. Obviously, A.J. Brown's probably going to get a ton of targets, but I think Goddard is the one that takes the majority of that work. And I would say this as well. I'd add in a couple extra design passes or two for Saquon Barkley in the pass game. We've seen him on a number of plays, wheel routes out of the backfield down the sideline, maybe throw in some screens, a swing screen here or there, something to get Saquon the ball in space. But having said that, let's wrap this up. What do you think? How do you think this game goes? What do you have for a score prediction?
Throughout most of the season, I think I've picked a lot of like moderately low scoring predictions, but I'm going to kind of go the opposite way here. I kind of could envision a shootout. The Rams' ability to score, I think, is going to come highly dependent on Puka Nacua's production. So if they take him out of the game, they might not score much at all. But I have Eagles 28, Rams 20. What's your prediction?
Actually, pretty close to yours, but let me give my thesis first. Listen, like you said, the Rams defense isn't very good, especially as a whole, as a unit, they're not very good. They have some spots and some strengths that they can use to attack teams, especially teams that aren't very good on the offensive line. But that's not this Eagles team, right? So I do think the Eagles are going to eventually find a way to take advantage of this Rams defense, but I do expect somewhat of a slow start. Number one, because that's just who this team is at this point in the time. We have to call a spade, and they start slow. And especially with how much disguise and the exotic things that the Rams will try to do, I do think it's going to take them a little bit to figure out this offense, a little bit to figure out this defense. But once they figure it out, I think they're going to be able to start hitting on some explosive plays. I do think they'll be able to move the ball on the ground, but like I said, they haven't given up a ton of explosive gains on the ground. So I think we have to temper our expectations a little bit for how much explosive runs we can expect out of this offense, but they still should be able to pick up some consistent yardage on the ground. Defensively, Fangio has done very well against the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. Vic Fangio really came into the zeitgeist when he shut down the Rams offense in 2018 with the Bears. I do expect them to frustrate this Rams offense. I think the run game should struggle. This Rams offense isn't super explosive if you take away their bread and butter, which are their end breaking routes, especially end breakers off of play action. If you can take that stuff away, then they struggle to hit chunk gains. And especially against this defense, I can expect that to continue. I think they should be able to pressure Stafford, especially when they get them into longer down and distance situations. And they should be able to get that done, knowing that they should be able to slow this team down on the ground. But again, their offense is good enough. Stafford is good enough to move the ball down the field. They will start to get some yards as the game goes on. And I think they will put up some points. So I do have the Eagles winning this one 26-20. So pretty close to your score prediction. But we will be back next week with not only the game review, but we will have a preview out on Wednesday, as I have a short week and I have some traveling coming up. So make sure you check out for that on Tuesday, and Wednesday is when those will be out. But as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.